Okay, thank you very much. So I'm Isabella Poon from the Chinese University of Hong Kong. So let me first start by introducing our panelists. And our first panelist is Professor Albert Chau, the Vice President Teaching and Learning of Hong Kong Baptist University. Albert earned his PhD in psychology. He was Director of General Education and Dean of Student Affairs of Hong Kong U, and now the Vice President Teaching and Learning of Baptist University. He is responsible for the university's teaching and learning and leads the development of curriculum and academic programs, quality assurance, innovative learning such as experiential learning and e-learning, student recruitment and placement, and globalization of teaching and learning. Welcome, Albert.
Thank you, Isabella.
We would also like to welcome another panelist, Professor Ronald, Chairman of Federation for Self-Financing Tertiary Education and Dean of Continuing Education, Hong Kong Baptist University. Ronald comes from electrical engineering and computing engineering disciplines, was professor and chairman of Department of Mechanical and Automation Engineering of CUHK, deputy executive director of VTC, and now dean of continuing education of Hong Kong Baptist University, and also chairman of FSTE. He is an academic leader with rich experience in higher education administration and management. Welcome, Ronald.
Hi, everyone.
And I also like to welcome Professor T.C. Pong, a good friend of mine. He is senior advisor to the Provost and professor of Department of Computer Science and Engineering, Hong Kong University of Science and Technology. TC has led a number of projects in multimedia computing, e-learning, computer vision, and image processing. He is currently also acting director of Center for Education Innovation of Hong Kong UST. He's an expert in MOOCs. TC, welcome. And we would also very much love to welcome Professor Bjørn Stensaker, our overseas panelist. Thank you very much. He is joining us at his time. It is midnight, I think, yes? And Professor Stensaker is the professor of higher education at University of Oslo, Norway. And he's also a research professor at NIFU, the Nordic Institute for Studies in Innovation, Research and Education. Bjørn has a special interest in studies of governance and change in higher education, including studies of how external and internal qualification assurance impacts the higher education sector. He has published widely on these issues in a range of international journals and books. He is currently a member of a number of QA agencies in different countries and places. So we look forward to hear your views and comments.
Nice to be here.
Bjørn, thank you. So as you are all very experienced senior management in the higher education and also have much experience in quality assurance, maybe we start by a very general question. What do you see as the key challenges facing institutions in regard to quality enhancement in teaching and learning? Maybe let's start with Albert. Albert.
Okay, thank you, Isabella. Thank you, colleagues who are watching online. I think the major challenges to teaching and learning and the quality enhancement is there with or without COVID-19. But COVID-19 would bring a new dimensions as well as accelerating all these changes. To me, the challenges come from two words. One is diversity, and the other one is speed. In terms of diversity, we know that the range of learning experiences is getting wider. In the past, we were pretty much limited to campus, to the lecture room, but now we are talking about service learning, experiential learning, internship exchange, so on and so forth. And we need to work with a lot of partners in different contexts in which student learning has to take place. But our needs may or may not be fully aligned with those of our partners. And we cannot assume our partners know our practices, such as OBTL, rubrics, so on and so forth. So we need to talk with them. We need to discuss and design the learning experiences together with them. And then there is also a need to ensure all these experiences are valuable and well organized. The second dimension of diversity is the diversity in assessment methods and provision of feedback. I think there is a large gap, a very big gap between the conventional assessment methods. For example, we ask our students to sit in an examination hall, and the future life of our students. For example, soft working space. When we turned online last semester, I met with my students saying that we have to do our assessment online. And my students said, okay, I will Google. I will talk to my classmates. And we consider this as cheating. But don't we do that every day? Okay, when I am confronted with a problem, I pick up my phone and call maybe Isabella, maybe colleagues in Chinese, and then I Google and see what other universities are doing. Okay, and then we have to change our quality enhancement measures to adapt it to cater for, say, continuous assessment for learning, assessment as learning, rather than assessment of learning. And then we also have to look into the assessment or documentation of the learning processes and assessment of the core competencies rather than just book knowledge. So, and then COVID-19, of course, would bring a new normalcy. There will be online mode of teaching, hybrid mode of teaching, and there will be a lot of inter-institutional co-teaching. So we have to ensure how to protect the integrity and quality of these courses. And then at my university, we were forced to run a lot of practicum sessions online. Some were shortened, okay, because of the time limitation, and some were delivered with the video mode. So we have to change our assessment as well. And as we all know, there are a lot of online short courses, for example, micro-credentials, nano degrees, micro degrees. So what would be the proper quality enhancement measures to maintain good balances between responsiveness and students' needs and accountability? Responsiveness is not the trademark of higher education. Okay, we have long approval procedures for changes in the curriculum, long approval procedures for the change in the assessment method. The Senate will take a year, okay, to approve anything. So we have to look into how we respond, and that is the second challenge I talked about, which is the speed, the rapid pace. Okay, so I should stop here, and then I look forward to a very fruitful discussion. Thank you.
Thank you, Albert, for your sharing. I like your keywords, diversity and speed. Maybe other panel members, do you have, I think you may have experienced some challenges that Albert have mentioned. Maybe you can also share with us what have you experienced and whether you have similar challenges. How about we start with Bjørn, because you are on mute.
Yeah, thank you. Thank you so much. I very much agree with the things that Albert is mentioning. I would especially highlight his emphasis on assessment. I think, but this is general. I mean, we are all struggling with handling the COVID-19 implications at our universities. But in general, I think one of the most conservative areas of university affairs is how we conduct exams, how we assess our students. And I think we also know how powerful a change engine. If we change the assessment, we also change the way that students learn. The challenge we I think face as those responsible for perhaps instigating change is that both our colleague academics, but also students are extremely conservative when it comes to the ways and forms of testing. They would like predictability. They would see that some legal issues related to testing is also upheld as an important thing. But I think one of the real challenges that we face is how to make sure that assessment is also being exposed to innovation and creative thinking, especially when technology perhaps is forcing us to limit the options that we have in this area. May I also say, and this is perhaps more of an internal challenge to universities, that at least in Oslo, where we also have tried to transform our teaching to a digital mode, I think what we see now is how important the organization is for delivering good digital teaching. In regular face-to-face teaching, the teacher have a lot of autonomy, and the teacher is almost in command of everything. In a COVID-19 situation, and where we are teaching in a much more digital mode, we see that it is the connections between the organization, the pedagogy, and the digital technology, and how the interplay is functioning between the support structure, the teacher, and the technology. The way that these three factors connect is so important for the quality that the student experience at the other end. So I think this situation that we are facing at the moment is also challenging us from an organizational point of view. Yeah, thank you.
Okay, thank you very much, Bjørn. Maybe TC. Okay, TC.
Yeah, thank you, Isabella, and thank you for Albert for making a very good introduction. I agree totally with you about what you pointed out, especially about the diversity of learning experience in these days. But I think what we really want to think about is what are the expected learning outcome that we want to deliver, especially these days. We all talk about, in addition to the disciplined knowledge, we also talk about the soft skills. It is very important in the 21st century, I think, success in the career. So how do we really measure or even assess such soft skill, right? The co-curricular activities that you talk about, or even other learning experience like service learning, is in a way try to deliver this kind of competency. But how to assess that and how to enhance that could be an issue that we really want to look into, because currently I think a lot of the quality assurance focus on the discipline, knowledge, and skill, right? But how we can actually enhance that is something we may not even know what is the best way of doing it, right? Let alone talking about how to assess that.
We are all aware of a quote: "What is countable may not count, and what counts may not be countable." Okay, so we are all aware of that quote. That is a big challenge: assessment and quality enhancement assessment.
And maybe just a follow up on TC's point. Well, we can see that there are many activities or learning activities nowadays. We have a wider range of learning activities and assessment method nowadays. Well, on the side of QA, well, do you think it is necessary for us to set up some common standards for all these activities? We know that there are some, well, they are different. However, there are some commonalities. So for example, we need students to have some hands-on exercise or hands-on participation in some work, and they need to go out and do things. Yes, we need something in this regard, the QA, some common standard. So for example, how many hours then equivalent to how many credit units, things like that. What do you think?
Well, I think that it would be good if you can do it. But very often, in order to assess such learning outcome in particular, for example, you talk about the 4 C's, right? Critical thinking, creativity, communication, and collaboration, and also the problem-solving skill. We may not be able to do a reliable assessment until the students graduated a few years ago, and then how success they are, and then collect feedback from the employers, right? So I think later on I'll talk about stakeholder feedback. So I think that's another important component.
Yeah.
Chair, I also
thank
have
you,
one
Ron.
point to make. I think traditionally the soft skills are acquired through interaction, exchange, internship, some projects, team projects, and so on. So a lot of these soft skills are acquired through some unstructured activities. So and what you acquire from all these unstructured activities are rather subtle. So how do you measure it and so on? It will be very difficult. So I think we are facing a very huge challenge in the coming days on how to somehow teach soft skills, nourish soft skills, and also assess soft skills. Something that we have to think about in the coming time and period of time.
Yes, I agree very much on that. Maybe, because we are talking about learning activities as well as assessment. Bjørn earlier also talk about the point that we should expose ourselves to innovative assessment approach. And so maybe we can discuss further along this direction. What do you see as the more innovative assessment approach? What do you have in your institution? And from the side of a QA, what can we do together to make the assessment more uphold the standard? For example, that is the usual term that we have been using, uphold the standard. But at the same time, we can encourage innovation. Perhaps we can also talk about this point. I think this is an important point, and I always think of, what can we do in this regard? Within the course, so for example, just an ordinary course, just like a science and engineering course, then what can we do? Any suggestion, Bjørn? Yeah.
Yeah, may I just follow up? I think what can we do? Indeed, it's a challenging issue, but a very important one. I think standards is one thing, but at the same time, and I think we all use learning outcomes in different parts of the world as a guide to design and organize our programs. But sometimes I wonder whether we actually take the learning outcomes that we describe seriously in the ways that we actually construct our tests and exams. Because if you look into into learning outcomes, they are quite often quite broad and general when it comes to student competences, skills. They include, as we have talked about now, soft skills. But when we test, we usually focus on the hard skills. You know, what can be tested in a quite easy way. And I think one way to perhaps at least encourage innovation here is also to maybe change the whole situation of testing. I mean, we at universities, we organize teaching and learning as in lectures, and then we have maybe group works, and then we have some examinations going on afterwards. So I think perhaps one way to also to start to test soft skills is to perhaps build assessment and examination into the learning process in a more seamless way than we have seen in the past. Using formative assessment, building on formative assessment as a way also of testing student involvement, their continuous struggle to learn, so that we have a much more process-oriented way of testing our students. So I think maybe experimenting a little bit with building assessment into the learning process could be at least one way forward.
Okay, so that is just like what Albert mentioned, assessment for learning as well as assessment as learning, right? Okay, TC.
Well, I just want to share my experience. I agree totally that the design of the exam, the test is very important. Yeah, I think the traditional way when you set up exam, is to ask the students question and expect the students to provide an answer, right? So, but then is this a good way to do the testing? They could just memorize certain thing and then give you an answer. What I have been trying to do lately is to ask the question, to come up with the question.
Yeah.
Even for multiple choice, right? Think about how difficult is it to come up with a good multiple choice question. But when I ask students, they try to come up with multiple choice questions. They sometimes getting much better questions than what I had in mind. And this is a good way to test students whether they have a good grasp of the concept. If they can come up with a good question, it's a good indication that they have some understanding of what is important. This inquiry-based learning too, right? I think this is another approach that I've been trying, especially now that we are moving online. So multiple choice question is not a good way to test for online exams, right? But then ask them to come up with the multiple choice question. It's another way to actually assess the understanding, the learning outcome of students.
So that is to ask the students to design the assessment together with us. Right?
Yeah, exactly.
Yeah, very good idea. Yes, thank you so much, TC. Anything you would like to add along this direction, or before we move to another question?
But I think sorry, Albert.
Sure, go ahead, please.
Bjørn, maybe.
Well, I just think this is one way, and I think it's also what TC is indicating here is that students represent a resource that we can also use for the innovation process, and I think good innovation processes here would imply that we actually start to talk to our students about what we try to accomplish. And get them on board quite easily. Also on the what these new forms of assessment and examination could actually be. Thank you.
Yeah. So that is the idea of having students as our partners, right?
Yeah.
Albert.
Yes, I think changing the assessment method is easier at the higher education level, but when it comes down to say big public examination, Bjørn talk about students are being conservative, teachers are. I think parents are also conservative. I still remember the debate about school-based assessment in Hong Kong. At the end of the day, parents objected to it. Teachers objected to it. Your A is only equivalent to my C. Okay, the A in your school is only equivalent to C in my school. That sort of things. So when we face with diversity, when we face with rapid change, we have to look at the standardization, grade moderation, that sort of thing. So the dynamic is always there.
Yes, I agree. Actually, Albert earlier also mentioned about the collaboration between institutions. So it is necessary, or to a certain extent, it seems that we may need some work in terms of standardization. Yes, in order to facilitate the collaboration. Okay, so well, maybe because earlier we all met, well, some of you also mentioned about the pandemic situation. And we see that in the past 12 months, contingency are made by institutions due to the pandemic and also other factors in Hong Kong. And part of this contingency have become norms. For example, the use of online and alternative delivery has now played a major role in teaching and learning and assessment. What are your views on the future development in light of these challenges? Maybe Ronald?
Thank you, Isabella. I think you have put it precisely. Because of the COVID-19 education at all levels, secondary, primary, kindergarten, and so on, have been affected one way or the other, willingly or unwillingly. It's already difficult for the tertiary education institutions already. It's particularly difficult for elementary school, primary school, and kindergarten, because whether they like it or not, they still have to go to e-learning and so on. And the kids are very young, and they have to get help from the parents and so on. So the consequences that were brought about are many, and we could actually at least see a few already. The teaching staff have to adapt to all these new normal e-learning in a very short time. Okay, that actually advanced the introduction of the e-learning across the board in Hong Kong and elsewhere. And the students also have a difficult time. They also have to adapt because all the learning teaching take place over the internet and so on. So they have to somehow make sure that the internet connections are good enough to actually follow the lectures and so on. And there are also many other things happening. For example, labs and practicum become very difficult. There's no face-to-face sections. So how do we somehow take care of the labs and practicum? This is particularly severe in some particular programs, like healthcare, nursing, medical, engineering, science, and so on. These are all a tough time for all these programs. Earlier, Albert actually mentioned about assessment, right? Now, without face-to-face contact, the exams would be almost impossible. Now, we have to somehow rely upon continuous assessment. But is that good enough? Is there other options for us? In some particular majors, they might want to have certain elements of exams. They could not rely solely on continuous assessment. Then how do we somehow tackle the problem? There are also some other issues. For example, some students may not have good enough internet connection. They may be out of town. They may be in a different time zone. So it's not very convenient for them to actually listen to all these online lectures live. So we have to somehow provide asynchronous learning in parallel with synchronous learning. What makes the whole thing even more complicated is, for example, in Hong Kong, after 28th, after 23rd, there will be certain schools, secondary school and also tertiary education institution, resuming face-to-face teaching. Then you have two kinds of students happening at the same time. You have face-to-face teaching in the classroom. You have online internet teaching for people outside Hong Kong and so on. Now, the instructors will have a difficult time having both at the same time. Especially, some instructors like me and also others, they like to walk around on the stage when they teach. That might somehow incur better teaching to some of us. But then when you walk around on the stage, making all kinds of hand gestures and so on, you're teaching, then could the camera also follow you, zoom to your face and so on? and also in the right time, they will discard your face and go back to the PowerPoint notes and so on. So these are all very difficult. So face-to-face and online teaching at the same time, co-delivery. No, I think we need more technologies to happen, to help us.
Yes.
And there are many other things as well. So back to you, Isabella.
Yes, I agree very much with you. The hybrid mode of teaching, that is face-to-face together with online, that is really a challenge. Maybe I ask TC first then, because TC is a engineering, I think, engineer, and also he has, well, I remember last time when we met at the HKCAAVQ office, you talk about some assessment approach that really help the teacher to invigilate the examination. So any comment on Ronald's points, TC?
Oh, yeah, before I talk about the assessment, I just want to share with you my own experience almost 18 years ago, if you still remember, 2003, when we had to face SARS, right?
Yes.
Yeah, and at the time, we had already moved to online, but the technology is not the same, right? The internet bandwidth would not be able to support live interactive online learning, but I don't think we learned from our experience. Now the history is repeating all over again. And in fact, in between SARS and now, in 2009, there was the swine flu. Okay, for those who are old enough would have gone through all these sequence of events. But what happened after SARS and swine flu, we move back to just traditional face-to-face teaching without much changes, right? I would say that after COVID-19, I think most institutions will probably revert back to the normal, although we all talk about the new normal, right? Because, it's difficult to change the mindset of faculty. They are most stubborn, right? So I think it's a matter of how we want to keep up this momentum. I see a lot of good things coming out of the experience. Yeah, people are really have now having experience in doing online teaching, but I don't think online teaching can replace face-to-face interaction totally. So I would say in the future, I would like to see more blended learning. You can move some of the lecture without interaction offline, online, and then do more face-to-face interaction to put the quality interaction in the classroom. As far as assessment is concerned, again, we are seeing some innovation. Yeah, in the past, I think you have all these memory type exam, but then now people are more innovative in coming up with other assessment approaches. But then what Isabella mentioned about how to monitor the students when they are doing the online exam is another issue that we have to deal with. But then I think if the exam is just not just to recall certain things that they learn, then it doesn't matter whether they have access to other online resources. Yeah, when the students are doing the exam.
Yes, TC, I like your point that we have learned a lot from SARS. So that time, this time we are not really well prepared for that. So I think this is something we may work together to see what we can do this time. Albert, what do you think?
Well, I think, because I have to look after assessment at my university, I have been scrambling with questions or issues that PC has brought up. A few months ago, my colleagues and I actually looked very deeply into 2 online proctoring systems. Okay, they use AI to detect bizarre movements on the student's part, for example, looking down on a mobile phone and so on and so forth. After 2 demonstrations, I said to my colleagues, sorry, I just don't want to pursue. It's not just because of money, but I don't want to perpetuate this kind of invigilation. So all this AI proctoring system is replacing a human invigilator with an AI system. So I think we do need to have a paradigm shift. This is what I've been discussing with my colleagues, and really look into the learning process. I think Bjørn talked about the technologies. I think these days we have sufficient computing power to look into, say, qualitative learning outcomes, essays, for example, okay, to detect, for example, the soft skills, whether they have a broader global outlook, or if we can document their teamwork, okay, the learning analytics can tell us, say, how a student evolves in a team setting. How the person, for example, may start with a very quiet mode, turning into a more outspoken or even eventually a leader. I think we can have sufficient computing power. We have sufficient learning analytic tools to look into the process of learning, and then to understand the acquisition of those soft skills a bit better. We are embarking on such a project. I don't know whether we will succeed or not, but somewhere someone has to give it a start and fail, okay? So that people who are coming after will succeed.
Okay, thank you.
I'll
Albert.
fail, I know.
Thank you, Albert. Bjørn?
Yeah, well, interesting questions. I think we are starting to maybe reaching a more matureness when it comes to the digital mode, where we are more aware of the benefits of face-to-face teaching and what can actually be done online and what can be done in a very good way online as well. I think we see from a lot of surveys and investigations that students enjoy the flexibility that digitalization provides. At the same time, we also have reports that students are struggling with loneliness, social isolation, and that the digital mode can be quite exhausting in the long run. And I think one of the classic insights we have from the world of learning is that learning is actually a social process. So how do we facilitate that in a very digital mode? And I think one of the dangers that we face today is that some of the technologies we are using, although they are fine in technical terms, I mean, Zoom, we have Canvas, the learning platform, there are Blackboard, all sorts of technologies available. They are quite standardized. And they are, if we start to think about it, also quite limited when it comes to the things you can actually do. I mean, you have a lot more flexibility if you have students gathered in a classroom, where you can organize group work in a much more informal way, and where you can foster different kind of dialogue. So I think one of the big challenges here is that we could risk that, you know, the digital mode that everyone talks about is a innovative form of teaching could actually be quite standardized, could actually be quite boring, could actually be quite, you know, maybe not fostering student learning in the best way possible in the long run. So, and we know that students are enjoying live sessions, you know, sessions like these where real people are talking about issues live, and where they can join in and be part of the discussion. There's been a lot of talk about the flipped classroom, you know, where you have videos that have been pre-recorded and stuff like that. But we know that students are, you know, they learn the best when they are engaged in a social process, discussing with each other, discussing and receiving feedback from the teachers. So I think it is a huge challenge for us to design educational offerings that emphasize the interaction in a good way. I think we, in many universities around the world, we are still perhaps, you know, taking the lecture, the old-fashioned lecture online, and continue with the lecture in a digital form, while the conditions for learning change when we enter into a digital space. So I think we really need to have a second look about how we design our educational offerings, because I think the design issue becomes much more important when we are offering education in a digital mode. And it, you know, when we do things face to face, we have a lot more flexibility. We can go back and forth, but in a digital format, that is much more difficult. So I think for most teachers, at least, to rethink what they are going to do when they teach, and to plan it in much more detail than they are used to do it, that is perhaps the biggest challenge. So I think one of the things that we need to look into is planning and designing our teaching, because that is something that we are not that used to do. Actually, we are experts as professors. We walk into the classroom, we have an idea of what we want to learn our students, and we play along with students. And in a face-to-face setting, that can be done. In a digital mode, that is much more difficult.
Yes, I agree very much with Bjørn. And also in the online learning mode, that is also many ways that can help our students to be more interactive. So maybe I can just share with you a survey conducted in our own university. Well, last term we have online survey and asking our students to comment, by two open-ended questions. What is the best aspect by the online learning, and then what is the challenges? And, you know, we receive more than 10,000 responses from our students. And the top rank about the good aspect, you know what? it is the interaction.
Okay.
And also on the other hand,
Through
for
the chat room?
the challenges, it is also interaction. So it means that there is a lot that we can do. There are some teachers, they are doing very good in the online platform, and there are some other teachers, they may need time to really catch up. So that is something that we can work together. Ronald, you have something to say, right?
No, I was asking whether the interaction was through chat room or something.
Chat room, through chat
I see.
room, yes. And so they are saying that they have more interaction with the teachers because they can now make use of the chat room. They are willing to raise hands and all this. I think so it is really a very surprise. Because we analyze all the student feedback, they are open-ended question, but the top rank, we really classify the comment into different categories. And then the category that many student comment is actually interaction on the good aspect.
But as a psychologist, I'm always concerned about the use of very short messages in the chat box or WhatsApp, okay, or Twitter.
Yeah.
To replace verbal communication. We all talk about learning as a social activity, and we all talk about the importance of building learning communities. I'm not saying that we cannot build online communities, but can we replace computer-mediated short messages, text, okay, and take that as good as in-depth verbal communication? I don't know. We need a very in-depth study.
Right. Yeah. Yes, I agree. We need some study in this regard. Bjørn?
Ronald first.
Go ahead, Bjørn.
Bjørn first. Bjørn?
No, Ronald was first, so let Ronald speak.
No, I was trying to say, even verbal communication could be done online.
Yes.
If you have a system like chat room, so that only one could speak at one time, then people could, compete for speaking over the internet, and the whole class could hear all the voice communication. It's not impossible.
Bjørn?
No, I think coming back to the point about chat rooms, especially when you have a large number of students and you are in a digital mode, you of course use chat rooms as a way to foster some kind of interaction and enhance student activity. And that is fine. At the same time, we also know that there is also a risk that is it really a quality discussion that goes on in this chat room? What are the academic level of the discussions going on here? And I think one of the things that we also need to look into as teachers is to train our students to be internationalize or to make more explicit academic standards and so that they can be more autonomous when they are conducting these discussions, because it's impossible for teachers to actually go into every chat room and to have the same function again as you can do in a face-to-face teaching situation. So again, I think there is a need for us to prepare students to be much more autonomous, to be much more aware of quality standards. So instead of just talking about substance in our teaching activities, I think we also need to provide or help students to develop some kind of a meta-awareness of the academic standards that we ourselves are having, and so that they can actually use them and develop them themselves in these chat rooms. I think to develop more autonomous students is really crucial, and that we should spend quite a lot of time actually in trying to foster that kind of self-aware and reflective students.
Okay, thank you. TC.
Well, I agree totally that the interaction is important. And also a chat room is one way of doing it. But for those who have actually done a Zoom or live interactive teaching, you know how difficult that is when you're giving the lecture. And then while the students are posting a lot of the comments on the chat room, we actually have complained that the teacher is spending too much time responding to what's being posted in the chat room and forgot about delivering the lecture. So I think really need to think about what the pedagogy. Recently, actually, because we need to move back to face-to-face teaching, but then we also have to take care of the online students. So we are now thinking about what are different ways to deal with mixed mode teaching. One approach that we are experimenting now, we don't have a good name for it, but we are calling it something like synchronized flip or a simultaneous flip. You know the flip classroom, right? You ask the students to watch the video, and then after that you have the face-to-face interaction. But think about now that in the last semester we had already recorded our Zoom lecture. What if you just play the Zoom lecture live to the student while the instructor is monitoring what the students are posting in the chat room? So the instructor now can pay attention to what is being posted. And because you have the video already, you can chunk the video in such a way that in between video, you can introduce interaction there. So it's a kind of flip, but the live interaction is synchronous also. So an instructor can pay attention to the interaction, the posting in the chat room while they are watching the video. So I think we can think about different kind of mixed mode teaching that could be beneficial, not only to the student, but also to the instructor. And in the new normal, think about that. Some students, after going through the online learning, they may prefer online learning, even if we are moving back to face-to-face, but some students will always prefer face-to-face. So in the future, we may not have a choice, but deal with mixed mode teaching. So I think we need to think about what the innovative way to deliver this kind of mixed mode teaching.
Yeah, thank you, TC. I agree with you. Yes, and also, well, we talk about many challenges and also many new practices under the pandemic, and also that can be continued to use under new normal. Then, well, we are in a conference of HKCAAVQ, right? And it is a QA.
I almost forgot.
And what do you think the future role of QA agencies will be in terms of collaboration with institutions in promoting, advocating, and supporting quality enhancement in teaching and learning? We have discussed so much that we can do. How about Bjørn? You have many experience in different QA agencies.
Yeah, well, thank you for for that easy question. What will be the future of QA? I think I would start by looking a bit into the history, also showing and demonstrating perhaps some of the challenges, because historically, quality assurance has not been about collaboration with higher education institutions. It's about being controlling higher education, and especially accreditation is very much a controlling instrument. And in the worst form, accreditation, as I sometimes talk about, accreditation is a process for killing innovation, because the historical standards that are used in accreditation, they are suggesting what is normal and what is not. And if you are creative and go beyond what is normal, then you run into trouble with quality assurance and accreditation. I think we, in many parts of the world, and I think quality assurance agencies are increasingly have recognized that they are part of a governance system, and that good governance is not only about control, it is also about enhancement. And I think, as in Hong Kong, that there is a need to try to strengthen the collaboration with institutions. What we have seen in different parts of the world is, of course, that many agencies are diversifying their activities, and that what you could call consultancy and guidance and development project, and perhaps also using the information that all these agencies have from many accreditation and from the historical process of accreditation, that the agencies also use that information to analyze it and feed it back into the institutions as a knowledge base for further development. But at least in Europe, I think we see that a number of agencies are experimenting and building up more consultancy and training processes, also for those working with quality management inside the higher education institution. So I think it's kind of interesting to see that, at least in a European context, we see that some quality assurance agencies are slowly transforming into what we have seen in the financial audit business, where the traditional financial audit was all about controlling, are your accounts in a proper shape, and what we have seen in that area is that the more the enhancement function, the strategic function of these consultancies, it's been much more emphasized, and this is where these firms today are earning most of their money. And of course, it is very difficult to predict what will go on in the quality assurance sector. But given the increased competition, also internationally, between quality assurance agencies, I think we will see a landscape of quality assurance providers that will maybe specialize a bit more in the future, and where you have some agencies that are perhaps being much more taking on the traditional accreditation role, while perhaps other agencies are trying to find a combined role, and perhaps some agencies are maybe fostering a role where development and institutional collaboration and guidance is becoming the thing that is highlighted.
Yeah, thank you for sharing your experience. And we can also observe some similar characteristics in the evolvement of QA system in Hong Kong. Well, under such a development, maybe I go to Albert first. And Albert, what's your comment? How would you expect, for example, HKCAAVQ or UGC QAC can work with us to enhance teaching and learning in your own institution?
Well, I pretty much agree with what Bjørn just said. And I think I don't know much about HKCAAVQ, so I better keep quiet. Otherwise, I'll say things wrong and sinful. So I don't want to do that. But for UGC QAC, I think they are moving more in a direction of partnership and enhancement. Earlier on, PC talked about engaging students as partners or even co-creators of examination questions. Can we apply the same logic to accreditation agencies? Mm-hmm. Every institution has its own objective, has its own culture. So can we develop with the QA agency a set of rubrics, okay, for accreditation or for QA for this particular agency? But of course, there would be certain criteria that we have to match. For example, the integrity of the process, some sort of, even though we say quantitative measures are not always applicable, but still can we have certain kind of very high level, somewhat abstract criteria, and then the institution will work with the agency to work out the process and the rubrics that is suitable to the institution. Say, for example, a liberal arts institution would be very different from an engineering technology institute. So we have to tailor-make to some extent that sort of criteria. And I still remember when I was a very young faculty member, they had this formative assessment of performance appraisal every year. So I define my own goals. whether I would like to spend more time on this particular research or more teaching. So in my formative years, I benefited a lot from that kind of co-creation of the appraisal system as formative mechanism. So I wonder if we can do something along those lines. So it would be somewhat of democratization of the accreditation and QA process, if you like the term.
Okay, thank you. Ronald, you have any comments?
Yeah, thank you. My feeling is HKCAAVQ has been actually stepping in the right direction for years already. They are changing from the process-based or class attendance-based to the more outcome-based, right? And I suppose they will also look into what Bjørn just said, or TC just said, sensible question asking based. They will look into that as well in the future. Now, I know that they also have certain allowance, and they are actually stepping up all these allowance on e-delivered program. So that is actually something that we have to look into very seriously. In terms of the exam requirement, assessment requirement, and so on, they will find ways to tackle all these difficulties, I guess. Back to you.
Okay, thank you. So
I just want to echo what Albert just said about partnership between the QA agency and the institutions are very important. Yeah, especially I think in this new normal, because things have changed, right? What about the QA process? And because the agency may not know much about what's going on in the institutions these days, right? When we all move to online, when we move to mixed mode, so how do we do QA? How do you assess learning outcome in such learning environment? And we are also changing our assessment tools, right? So again, all these will need to be communicated with the QA agency. I think in the past, the problem that we often face, I think we all have the experience when we talk about the QA audits, right? The faculty often would ask, who are they to assess us, right? So, and I think we somehow we have to get the faculty buy-in. That's very important. And actually, Albert in the opening talk about in the past, the agency role is more as a gatekeeper when they talk about QA quality assurance. But now the role has been changed more to being a facilitator, to be the gate opener.
Yes.
So I think this is very important, right? So I think for the agency to work together with the institutions, really the goal is on quality enhancement.
Yes.
Yeah. So I like very much the idea of engaging institutions as partners or they should be as facilitators. Yes, Bjørn?
Just a response to Albert's comment about partnerships. I definitely agree there, and I think we can see in different parts of the world that quality assurance agencies are trying to develop various forms of partnerships, trying to tailor their accreditation processes more to the specific needs of the institutions. In some parts of the world, this is called risk-based approaches to quality assurance, and that's fine. At the same time, there is a problem, or there is at least a challenge there, because again, when we talked about our fellow academics and students that are sometimes being conservative when it comes to the ways that examinations are conducted, we also see that while institutions on the one hand want to be seen and assessed and accredited on their specific profile, they also want to be treated equally with all the other institutions. So for quality assurance agencies to have a more diversified approach to accreditation, can be a challenge when, especially in an area where institutions also at the same time want to be treated in exactly the same way, according to the same standards as their neighbors. So there is a challenge here, especially for accreditation agencies, to balance these different expectations coming from institutions, but also from national governments, that they also would like to see some standards, at the same time that they also would encourage institutional profiles and so there is a fine balance to be struck there.
Yes, I agree on that. Yes, also when QA agency come to monitor us, and they will ask for feedback. So I think let's turn to another question about feedback. Well, engagement of stakeholders in feedback collection and turning them into actions for quality enhancement are critical and essential as part of robust teaching and learning process. What are the key success factors in making this happen? How can we do a better job in the midst of new normal? TC, can you share with us your views?
Yeah, thank you, Isabella. But I think we would all agree that collecting feedback from stakeholders is important for quality enhancement in teaching and learning, especially during time of change, like what we are going through now due to COVID-19. And it's stated in the HKCAA manual for the 4-stage quality assurance process that program outcomes are typically assessed by analyzing information such as stakeholders' feedback and employment data from employees and companies. Employers and companies. Stakeholders can be engaged in evaluation and alignment of program objectives and learning outcomes, and also provide input to the planning for improvement purpose, as well as making governance and management decisions. In order for such feedback to be useful, we need a better understanding on who our stakeholders and what are their interests and expectations. Different stakeholders, for example, internal and external, could have different short-term or long-term interests. Think about what the students would say if you ask them whether they would prefer face-to-face or online teaching when they are paying full tuition fee. Although we all know that safety is a concern, but then they always would ask for more interaction, more access to the facility when they are paying the fee. But then what they're thinking, it's more short-term. So we need a clear plan on what and how to collect feedback from stakeholders and how they will be analyzed and used. Last but not least, completing the feedback loop by informing stakeholders of the follow-up or changes made is also very important. Now, on the question, how can we do a better job in the midst of this new normal? Since most institutions have moved to teaching and learning online, the digital learning platform would allow us to collect a huge amount of data or feedback that are useful for better understanding how students learn and how we could enhance our delivery of teaching and learning. So it's a matter of how we want to use such a wealth of information for quality enhancement. Adjustments to the strategy and planning may be needed in order to sustain the momentum brought about by COVID-19. So I would like to other members to share the ideas on this topic too.
Yeah, thank you. I think it is very important that we provide feedback to those who provide feedback to us, right? Yes, completing the feedback loop is important, closing the feedback loop. Ronald, any suggestions or ideas in this topic?
No, I just want to say a few words about the data collection. I think in the traditional face-to-face teaching, the way we acquire information or data or feedback from the students, for example, typically through questionnaires and so on. So they are not at moments, but instead, perhaps you only do it once or twice in a semester or something. Okay, so it's actually a collection. Whereas in the case of the e-learning, okay, in this particular age, you have a lot more data that you can actually use. Okay, the question is, there could be too much data, and you have to somehow capture the essential ones. You have to do certain analytics and so on, and you can have immediate feedback to the class. I think that is the positive side of the age of e-learning. Okay, so I'm actually optimistic on this particular regard. I feel that I think in the age of e-learning, there are lots more possibilities we can actually pursue. Okay, so that's my feeling in a way.
Yeah, thank you, Ronald. Bjørn, any suggestions or comments?
Yeah, I think. Well, thanks, TC, for the intro comment here. I think what we see today is I think a growing awareness that interaction with stakeholders is very important. And I think both institutions and quality assurance agencies are in a quite regular fashion collecting information from stakeholders, trying to engage in dialogue with stakeholders and so forth. So I don't think that the frequency of interaction is the problem, really. I think the big problem is to have more long-term thinking about, what are really the future qualifications needed and how is the working life going to develop in the long term? Because many of the current stakeholders, employers, they are very emphasizing, they are looking for graduates having knowledge that can be immediately utilized into a work-life setting. So they are very concerned about, do I get good graduates that can start to work and be up to speed from day one? Fine. But, the role and the job for universities is also to develop the graduates of the future. So I think one of the challenges when focusing too much on the present needs of the labor market or whatever is that we are educating for yesterday instead of educating for tomorrow. So I think one of the problems that we have is how to facilitate processes where we can at least encourage stakeholders also to think about in long terms, beyond the horizon, so to speak. And I think, again, we have talked much about students in this conversation, and I think, it's popular in many study programs and offerings that students sometimes, they are out in practice, they are visiting employers, and I think one of the things that we could use students for also is to, use them as, use them in a more creative way. Try to think a bit more long term when it comes to the future need of the labor market, because that, I think, is really the big challenge.
Okay, thank you, Bjørn. Albert, you share similar views?
For collection of feedback, we have to somehow establish some sort of a common understanding with our stakeholders. Bjørn just talked about the employer's view, which I totally agree. But Bjørn, I don't think we are just educating for tomorrow. We are educating for the day after tomorrow, and the day after, and the day after. Actually, it is lifelong. Okay, so if our employers are somewhat concerned about our graduates' performance on the first job, okay, then we don't have a common platform. So we might have to communicate with them better. Of course, we live in the ivory tower, okay? We have to understand their point of view and the community and parents' expectations as well. So I think establishing a common dialogue would be very important, a common goal for education. Secondly, on a more technical side, PC talked about feedback. I totally agree. It is very important. But at times, we have two types of feedback, which I think we need to distinguish. First one is the satisfaction or end of semester evaluation survey, that sort of things. Pretty much that is a satisfaction survey. And the feedback on, say, the delivery of the classes would be very good. But on the other hand, we also need to get feedback from the learning achievements of our students. Okay. And I think we have, as Ronald pointed out, a much richer database. For example, Isabella talked about the number of checks have increased. If we had a chance, had a way to document the number of checks in a Zoom learning environment, whether or not the communication is one way, many to one, or the students are pointing towards the teacher, or there would be a lot of communication. One student asks a question, the other student provides an answer. Or on Moodle, number of visitations, how long do they stay on a certain point? How long do they stay on a lecture? We have a lot of data in that, and those are very useful feedback as well. So we don't have to collect feedback as a separate procedure. We log the data as they learn and then analyze those data. That's the dream I want to do. I'm not saying that I can do it, but I think the technology has already afforded that kind of possibility. It is up to us to make the best advantage of it.
Okay, thank you, Albert. I think you all know that in the next UGC QAC audit cycle, collection, analysis, and usage of data is the selected audit theme. So we have many opportunities to work together with the QA agencies to advance in this direction. So we now have just 1 minute. So maybe just very quickly as a summary, well, can every one of you just tell us what's the take-home message today after the discussion in 1 or 2, well, just a very key words. Maybe I can share my one first. I like TC's idea. We didn't learn too much last time in SARS. And this time we have to do better. We have to reflect on our experience to do better. Others?
Well, I agree with you. I think we need to keep the momentum going. We see a lot of good things, and we shouldn't let the history repeat again. I think we should learn from these challenging time and see how we could move forward.
Okay, thank you. Others?
My feeling is people adapt fast. At the moment, the students could be complaining about the e-learning and so on. They don't like that. They want face-to-face learning and so on. But if the new normal has become the permanent normal, I guess they will get used to it, especially good students. And then they will be ever more demanding on all these teaching, e-learning and so on. So I think the teachers have to be better prepared.
Thank you. Albert or Bjørn? Bjørn?
Well, yeah, summarize in a sentence. Well, I think universities in Hong Kong and elsewhere, they have been very good in adopting to a crisis situation. And I think we've done it because we have very competent staff and we have flexible students. And a lot of what we have done is a bit ad hoc.
Yes.
I think what we really need to do is to take one step back and to enhance learning. I also think we need to focus more on the overall design of these new digital modes and what hybrid teaching and learning will look like in the future. And that requires some really serious thinking about the nitty-gritty design of these offerings.
Okay, thank you, Bjørn. Albert?
I think we need to change. We need to change fast. We need to change with a purpose. And that purpose is to maximize student learning.
Okay, thank you, Albert. So at this point, maybe we should, I should, on behalf of the panel, thank HKCAAVQ for organizing this event and allow us to talk about our views and share our experience. I would also like to thank the Secretariat for their support and also the audience for your participation. We should enjoy the conference and stay healthy. Bye-bye.
Thank you.
Bye-bye. Bye-bye. Thank you.